It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night that made you question your existence and feel a shiver down your spine. The boys' hostel was situated on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by a dense forest and far from any civilization. The residents of the hostel had heard rumors of strange occurrences in the forest, but never thought much of it. As the night grew darker, the wind picked up and the rain became heavier. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door. The hostel warden, a gruff and intimidating man, opened the door to find a bedraggled stranger. The stranger was soaked to the bone and had a wild look in his eyes. The warden let him in and offered him a cup of tea to warm up. The stranger began to tell his tale, speaking of a mysterious force that lived in the forest, a force that had been terrorizing the local villagers for years. He spoke of how he had been on a camping trip with his friends and how they had stumbled upon an ancient temple in the heart of the forest. They entered the temple and found a strange statue that seemed to come to life, and before they knew it, they were being hunted by an unseen presence. The residents of the hostel listened intently, feeling a mix of curiosity and fear. They asked the stranger if he had managed to escape, but before he could answer, a loud screech echoed through the hostel and the lights flickered and went out. The residents were plunged into darkness, and all they could hear was the sound of footsteps slowly approaching them. Panic set in as the residents searched for a source of light, but every flashlight they tried failed to work. Suddenly, the door of the hostel room burst open, and a figure stood in the doorway. It was tall and thin, with long, bony fingers and piercing red eyes. The residents screamed and tried to flee, but the figure moved with lightning speed, and soon, they were all cornered. The figure began to speak in a language that was not of this world, and as it spoke, the residents felt their minds being pulled into a dark void. They saw visions of death and destruction, and they felt a deep sense of dread that they would never escape. Just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure disappeared, leaving the residents shaken and bewildered. They gathered together and decided to leave the hostel and never speak of what had happened. But as they stepped outside, they found that the storm had passed and the sun was shining bright. They looked at each other in confusion, wondering if what they had experienced was real or just a nightmare. As they made their way back to civilization, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They decided to keep what had happened to themselves, but as time passed, they began to see the signs of the mysterious force that had terrorized the stranger and the local villagers. They started to understand that the force was still out there, waiting for its next prey. The residents of the hostel never returned to the forest, and their story was lost to time. But for those who dare to venture into the depths of the forest, the tale of the mysterious force still echoes, reminding them of the dangers that lay in the heart of the unknown. And now, as we conclude this haunting tale, we move on to our next story. The boys' hostel was known for its old-world charm and Gothic architecture, but few knew of the dark secrets that lay hidden within its walls. The hostel was built on the site of an ancient burial ground, and the residents often reported feeling a strange, eerie presence that lingered in the air. One evening, as the residents settled into their rooms for the night, they noticed that the door to one of the rooms was ajar. The residents, who were known for their curious natures, decided to investigate. As they entered the room, they were greeted by an overwhelming stench of decay and death. In the center of the room, there was a large, wooden chest, its lid thrown open to reveal a jumbled mess of bones and tattered clothing. The residents quickly realized that the chest contained the remains of a young man who had gone missing from the hostel many years ago. His death was never fully explained, and the hostel had been shrouded in mystery ever since. The residents were horrified, and they quickly left the room, locking the door behind them. However, as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. The residents heard strange noises coming from the room, and they felt a sense of unease that they couldn't shake. Some even claimed to see ghostly apparitions lurking in the shadows. The next morning, the residents decided to confront the warden about the room and its contents. The warden was a gruff and intimidating man, but the residents were determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. The warden reluctantly agreed to take them to the room, and as they approached the door, they noticed that the stench of decay was even stronger. As they entered the room, the residents were struck by a wave of cold, putrid air that seemed to seep into their bones. The chest was still open, and the bones and tattered clothing were still scattered about. The residents were about to leave the room when suddenly the door slammed shut and the room was plunged into darkness. The residents were terrified and tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The darkness seemed to be alive, and they could feel it closing in on them, threatening to swallow them whole. Suddenly, the remains in the chest began to stir, and the bones came together to form a skeletal figure that stood before them. The residents screamed in terror, but the figure remained motionless. Suddenly, its eyes lit up with an otherworldly glow, and it began to speak. The figure told them of a curse that had been placed on the hostel and of the evil that lurked within its walls. It warned them of the dangers that lay ahead and told them that they must leave the hostel at once if they hoped to survive. The residents were finally able to escape the room, and as they ran out into the daylight, they realized that the hostel had changed. The Gothic architecture had given way to an otherworldly landscape, and the once beautiful gardens were now overrun with twisted, gnarled trees. The residents were horrified, but they were determined to escape. They made their way through the unfamiliar landscape, dodging strange, sinister creatures that seemed to be lurking at every turn. Finally, they stumbled upon a path that led them out of the hostel and back to civilization. However, the curse was not broken, and the residents were never able to fully shake the sense of unease that lingered with them. To this day, the boys' hostel remains abandoned, and the curse is said to still linger. Those who dare to venture near the hostel often report strange occurrences, and some say that the ghost of the young man who died still haunts the halls, seeking revenge for the evil that claimed his life. The residents who escaped the hostel never spoke of their experiences to anyone, for fear of being branded as mad or foolish. But the tale of the cursed hostel has lived on, passed down from generation to generation, a warning to all who would dare to venture near its walls. The hostel stands as a testament to the power of evil, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in even the most beautiful of places. And for those who dare to listen, the whispers of the cursed hostel can still be heard on quiet nights, a haunting reminder of the horrors that lie within. So, if you ever find yourself wandering near the old boys' hostel, be warned, for the curse still lingers, and the evil that haunts its halls is as strong as ever. For those who dare to enter, they may never return, lost forever in the world of fear, horror, and darkness. As the sun sets on the abandoned boys' hostel, the darkness creeps in, filling the once bustling halls with an eerie silence. But, just as the night seems to settle, a strange rustling sound can be heard coming from within the hostel's walls. It's as if something, or someone, is stirring within the shadows. Suddenly, a new horror is unleashed, one that is even more terrifying than the legends of the hostel. It's time to venture into a new realm of fear, where the unknown awaits. Welcome to the story of horror. Another hostel story. The boys' hostel was once a thriving institution, but over the years, it had become decrepit and forgotten. The walls were peeling, the windows were broken, and the gardens were overgrown with weeds. The only sound that could be heard was the haunting creaking of the old wooden floorboards. One day, a group of young men, seeking adventure, stumbled upon the hostel and decided to spend the night there. At first, they thought it would be a fun and exciting experience, but as the night wore on, they began to regret their decision. The darkness seemed to seep into the hostel, bringing with it a feeling of unease. The young men tried to ignore it, but the feeling only grew stronger. Suddenly, they heard a loud banging on the door, and they quickly realized that they were not alone in the hostel. They cautiously made their way to the door, but when they opened it, they were met with nothing but darkness. The sound of footsteps could be heard, and the young men felt a sense of fear that they had never experienced before. As the night wore on, strange things began to happen. The young men heard whispers in the dark, and they felt a cold breath on the back of their necks. They tried to leave the hostel, but the door was locked from the outside, trapping them inside. The young men soon realized that they were not alone in the hostel, and that something evil was lurking in the shadows. They could feel its presence, and they knew that they were in grave danger. The next morning, the young men awoke to find that the hostel was no longer the same. The walls were now adorned with strange symbols and writing, and the gardens were filled with twisted, gnarled trees. The young men were horrified, but they were determined to find a way out. As they made their way through the hostel, they encountered strange and terrifying creatures, and they began to understand the true nature of the evil that lurked within its walls. The hostel was a prison, a place where the souls of the damned were trapped, and the young men were now part of that grim fate. Despite their fear, the young men pressed on, determined to escape the hostel and the evil that haunted it. They searched for a way out, but it seemed that no matter how far they went, they were always drawn back to the center of the hostel where the evil seemed to be strongest. Finally, after what felt like hours, the young men stumbled upon a secret door hidden behind a bookcase. They quickly made their way through the door and into a dark, underground passage. They followed the passage until they came to a large chamber where they were finally able to escape the hostel. As they emerged from the underground passage, the young men were relieved to find themselves back in the outside world. They quickly made their way away from the hostel, never looking back. However, the evil of the hostel did not die with their escape. The young men carried the memory of the hostel with them, and they knew that they would never be able to shake the fear that they had felt while they were trapped within its walls. The hostel still stands, a forgotten and abandoned monument to the evil that once lurked within its walls. And for those who dare to venture near, they can still feel the presence of the evil waiting to claim its next victims. So, if you ever find yourself near the old boys' hostel, be warned, for the evil that haunts its halls is as strong as ever, waiting for its next unsuspecting victims to fall into its grasp. Years have passed, but the legends of the hostel have only grown stronger. People still talk about the horrors that occurred within its walls, and many have claimed to have seen strange and unsettling sights near the hostel. Some say that the spirits of the young men who once tried to escape still haunt the area, forever trapped in the grasp of the evil that once controlled them. Despite these tales, there are still those who dare to approach the hostel, seeking to uncover the truth behind the legends. Some are curious and want to experience the thrill of fear, while others believe that there is something of value hidden within the hostel that is worth the risk. However, those who dare to venture too close to the hostel soon regret their decision. They are faced with a feeling of unease, as if they are being watched by something sinister. Some even claim to have seen strange, ghostly apparitions wandering the halls of the hostel. The true nature of the evil that haunts the hostel remains a mystery, but one thing is for certain: those who enter the hostel rarely come out unchanged. The hostel is a place of darkness and terror, where the line between reality and nightmare is blurred, and where the only escape is through a harrowing journey into the unknown. So, if you are ever tempted to explore the old boys' hostel, be warned, for the evil that lurks within its walls is not something to be taken lightly. It is a force that feeds on fear and feeds on the souls of the foolish, waiting for its next victim to fall into its grasp.